Thank you, President of the Institute, also for the invitation. Ambassador of Azerbaijan, colleagues, excellencies, friends. The short presentation that I'm going to present now is actually, this one? Okay. Is actually leaning on a paper that was prepared by the planning department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Those of you who would like to see the paper in its entirety, I can send it afterwards. In my presentation, I omitted some parts that I agree less with, and also because it's only 8 minutes presentation. So let's go down to business. Is it okay?
Yes, right side.
Right side?
Yes.
Okay, right side. Let's start with the primary drivers. I think you are all aware that basically what is happening here is the magnitude of health crisis. When I left the embassy 2 hours ago, the number of people that were infected all over the world since the beginning of COVID-19 is around 10.5 million, of which 5.5 million have been recovered by now. So that is to say that we still have 5 million active cases. And unfortunately, more than half a million people died by now. In Israel, which is a very small state, only 9 million people, by now 25,000 people have been infected. Most of them have been recovered. We still have 6,000 active cases, and more than 300 people died by now. This is leading, obviously, to the magnitude of the economic crisis. Now, here we made an interesting experiment. We took some of the indicators of the current economic crisis that we are facing, mainly the drop in GDP, which is around 12% beginning between January and March. I guess now it might be bigger. The level of unemployment, we took US, which is reached by now to 13% and might reach later on to 30%. And we checked also the drop in the value of one of the most important world indexes, the Dow Jones, which in the first 4 months of the year became to 25%. We compared it with two other crises, with the Great Recession that we all remember between 2007 and 2009, and we also compared it to the Great Depression between 1929 and 1939. So without, for the sake of time, without getting into too many of the details, we saw that this current crisis is much closer to the indicators of the Great Depression between 1929 and 1939, to the other recessions that we all remember that took place only 10 years ago, between 2007 and 2009. We all remember what followed the Great Depression between 1939 and 1945. This doesn't mean that this has to happen this time as well, but I think this is a good way to understand the depths and the watershed event that we are facing now, with all the social, political, technological, and ideological factors that are coming after such an immense and dramatic event. I'd like to go now to the secondary drivers, and for the sake of time, I think I will speak about the three first drivers in a bunch. I'm talking here about globalization versus isolation, cooperation versus competition, and the battle of ideas, mainly democracy versus autocracy. In all those three, and that's why I'm speaking about them in the same bunch, we see actually the same pattern. We see that some, I would say, a phenomena of challenging globalization and challenging cooperation and also challenging democracy preceded the current crisis. We saw already that all those elements that maybe after Second World War everybody thought we are going in the direction of globalization, cooperation, and democracy, actually all those were challenged already in different parts of the world. And what we see now in the COVID-19 is actually an accelerator that is taking a phenomena that we saw already and accelerating it and bringing it into a peak. So in the short run, I think there are bad news for globalization, bad news for cooperation, and bad news for democratic regimes. This is in the short run. In the long run, that has to be said. I think the depths of or the strengths or the stability of globalization, again, cooperation and democracy, is being challenged, but it's too early to say what will be in the long run, and obviously it's not easy to define short run from long run. As for the fourth element, technology, as the saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention. For a state like Israel, which is leaning on high technology, I think this is basically, there is an opportunity here. Technology eventually will be the thing that will defeat the COVID-19, and I think I can say that in Israel, this is a big opportunity for us, and this is something that we are looking forward to try to help the international community address this challenge of the COVID-19, leaning on technology that is being developed in Israel. Some implications which are more relevant to Israel. The world power struggle, much is being said about the tension now mainly between the US and China. Both are states that Israel is very close to. However, it's quite clear that we have a strategic partnership with the US, and we might need to make some decisions in the future. And obviously, this has to be bear in mind that the US is a strategic partner of Israel, but obviously this tension between the US and China, and also the tension between US and Russia, are not good for a small state like Israel that try to have reasonable and good relationship with all the parties. The second element, the stability of regime in the Middle East. Again, this is also something that always was part of our strategic thinking. So we have on one end the regimes around Israel, and here I think it's quite clear that economic stress, which obviously is expected after the COVID-19, will not contribute to the stability of those regimes. But I think one element that we didn't speak here today is the drop of the prices of oil in the world, and this can affect other states in the Middle East that do not share a border with Israel. I'm mainly talking about the states along the Gulf, the Arabic Gulf or the Persian Gulf. I don't want to be messed up here with anybody, so let's just say the Gulf. Cybersecurity, again, I think the COVID-19 have exposed many attacks on cyber system, national and also private cyber system. Again, this is one place where Israel can offer some help, some remedy, and that's for us an opportunity. The fourth element is something which is unique to Israel, the Jewish diaspora in the world. Israel considers itself to be the Jewish state. Hence, we do have responsibility for Jewish communities all over the world, in Turkey, in the US, in Russia, and other places, and that has to be said. Maybe not so much in Turkey, but in the US and in many places in Europe, as happens often in history, economic stress brought also a lot of anti-Semitism. And that's a phenomena that makes us worried, makes us concerned. It is mainly in the social media, which is also quite of a new phenomena. I don't know how many of you are aware of this challenge, but for us, the growing a pattern of anti-Semitism, mainly in the social media, is a problem that we think how to address it in a better way. Some closing remarks. Black Swan. What we see now, the perfect storm that we are facing now is another example of the Black Swan, what is known in political theory, Black Swan. As Black Swan, the Brazilian ambassador spoke already about the Spanish flu in 1918, immediately after the First World War. I think the Arab Spring in 2011 was another example of a Black Swan that started by somebody who just burned himself in Tunisia, and then all the Arab world again went into disarray. And what we are having now, when somebody in the market in China either ate something or not, and within few months all the international community was influenced, that's another example of Black Swan. You have an expression in Yiddish, which is the old language of the German Jews, which says, man is planning and God is laughing. In Yiddish it sounds better, and I think that's the case. We are all planning, all the ministries of foreign affairs have a planning department, and we plan, and then you have a Black Swan. The second remark is that public health is a key component of national security. I think it's clear now, next to military might, next to economic stability, next to social solidarity, which are the traditional understanding of components of national security. I think it is clear now that public health is an important part of it. Vulnerability of the international system to global threats. I think the ambassador of India mentioned it, climate change. We thought that if there will be a global challenge, it will be the climate change. So currently the global challenge is COVID-19, but I think to some extent the failure of the international system to address in a proper way the challenge of the COVID-19 shows the weakness of the international system to address what might be the next global challenge, which is the climate change. Last but not least, challenges versus opportunities. We in Israel have kind of the, I think many of you know that whenever we have to choose between challenges and opportunities, we turn to the opportunities. So obviously the situation creates many challenges, but as I said before, it creates also some opportunities. And as a gentleman, which is very much respected in Israel, said once, and Dominic, I think you will recognize the next gentleman, never let a good crisis go to waste. I thank you very much.